Hello and welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com, where every week we preview the upcoming weekend's Premier League action. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Jonathan Wilson and George Elek as well. This week we are going to start with Manchester United v Brighton. I'm going to get straight into it, Jonathan. We saw our first glimpse of Højlund in a Manchester United shirt before the international break. What did you make of that first glimpse?
He was okay. He might have had a penalty. He was only on the pitch for 23 minutes. I don't know. People seem to be getting very excited by him, saying, "Oh yeah, he's definitely the man to make United work." Like he might be. I didn't think it was as exciting as some people made out, and the fact that people were so excited by it, I think suggests just how low United have sunk. He didn't win a header in the game, which, given his size, is something you'd hoped he might have achieved. But you know, he's got energy, and that instant where he possibly could have won a penalty, I guess that is something. But I just don't really think that 23 minutes you can judge.
I mean, to be honest, I found the international break probably one of the most tedious I've ever found an international break until last night. England obviously playing Scotland, George. So my memory might not be serving me correctly here. But was he involved in the goal that never was for Manchester United later on by dropping deep? I think that was one facet I remember watching in that game, thinking his link-up play was pretty good in dropping deep in that brief cameo.
Yeah, maybe. I think it was just United fans getting excited about having an actual striker playing up front. You know, a guy that is physical enough to at least try and bully defenders. Like, his pressing numbers have been very good throughout his career. He's someone who obviously puts himself about a bit. His goal scoring record is fine. You know, it's good having a left-footed striker, offer something a bit different, and he's also, you know, capable of pulling wide and running the channels and getting balls in. So, like, he is something that United haven't had for a long time, and I think when you're used to having Anthony Martial playing up front for you, and suddenly you've got a bit of a unit coming on who can probably influence a game just basically whenever he's near the ball a bit more often than Martial does, then you're going to get excited. But, you know, as Jonathan said, it was 25 minutes. He seems to be getting a lot of credit for basically bustling around and nearly winning a penalty. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. As I say, I think stylistically, just Manchester United having a striker, having an out-and-out centre-forward is going to improve them.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel very 2016 when Martial's leading the line for Manchester United. I'm not sure.
But that's exactly it, isn't
happening.
It? That to me is a bigger indicator of where United are at. The fact that Martial is still the man they have to turn to start, because Rashford is clearly more effective on the left. I know they've tried to play him through the middle to get Garnacho in, and yeah, there's hope there in Garnacho, but I don't know. People seem to be placing a lot of faith in him, and yeah, there have been promising signs, but he's a kid who plays the same position as probably your best player. I mean, I sort of thought this with Pogba failing a drug test this week. Just how many players have gone to United for large sums of money and been made worse?
There's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, all of them. Who's gone to United in the last 5-10 years and seen their value increase?
I think that's especially true in front three positions. I think they've not improved anyone in their front three. Rashford's still their best player in their front three, and he came through the academy. But anyone they've put in that front three has regressed, really. I think that's a fair statement.
Even Rashford had like a malaise of a few seasons as well.
Yeah, he did.
But also, on the Rashford thing, if any manager ever plays him through the middle again, I think it's a sackable offence on its own. He's absolutely in no way is he a striker. It's almost like a relic of the fact that because he played up front when he was 18 years old and broke into the side, there's still this perception that he can do a job through the middle. He's completely wasted out there. Like, his skill set is that of a player that gets on the ball on the left and comes inside onto his right foot. Like, that is what he does time and time again. He's one of the best at it. So when you shove him through the middle, and you're just taking away the one area where he's consistently impactful in games.
Yeah, I mean, the battle of two number nines this weekend. Potentially Højlund may play for Manchester United. I think Evan Ferguson, Jonathan, will certainly play for Brighton in this big game this weekend. And we've got a head-to-head graphic coming on the screen now. Evan Ferguson last week against Newcastle, Jonathan, he just has always seen, ever since he's broken into the Brighton team, like the complete striker that can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a game at Brighton, and he was. I mean, that second goal, just a ridiculously good goal. I mean, okay, the third one he gets a little bit lucky, but even then, the way he checks onto his left foot, where he creates a space for himself, that's incredibly impressive. the first goal, he's got the sort of positional awareness to know where the ball might drop to and to be there. But that second goal, I mean, I think the way Dan Burn dropped made it easy for him. But to move on to a pass coming into you, to turn, and then just to size up what you're going to do, and from near enough 30 yards, essentially side foot the ball in the bottom corner. It's just a ludicrously good goal. So I've seen various people sort of saying, "Oh, he's reminiscent of Kane," but Zerbi actually, and I think he's right. Zerbi sort of said no, that he's not really like Kane at all, and he was compared to Haaland, and he said no, he's not like Haaland. So we sort of said to him, "Well, who does he remind you of?" And the player he said was Christian Vieri. And I mean, there's the obvious.
I like that.
The obvious difference is that Ferguson's right foot and Vieri was left foot. But apart from that, in terms of being that all-round player, that he's big, he's strong, he can win balls in the air, he's good with his back to goal, but he's a phenomenally good finisher and scores goals from outside the box as well. I think he's an incredibly exciting prospect. The only thing you would say, I mean, this isn't really about Ferguson. It's about how we talk about young players. That he's the fourth 18-year-old to score a hat-trick in the Premier League. So Michael Owen's got 3, Robbie Fowler and Chris Bart-Williams.
I was not expecting you to say Chris Bart-Williams. I was expecting the name Wayne Rooney to come out. I was not expecting Chris Bart-Williams.
Yeah, I mean, not somebody I think you think of as being prolific. But also, and I don't know if it's just because of injuries, but Owen and Fowler had sort of felt to me they didn't quite achieve what they promised to achieve. I mean, they achieved great things, don't get me wrong. But it felt the end of their careers were anticlimactic. So there is that caveat. That's scoring hat-tricks at an early age. But he's very different to Fowler and Owen. I mean, obviously very different to Chris Bart-Williams, who's just not that sort of player, not a centre-forward. Owen, obviously, his pace was the key thing. Fowler had pace in a different way. He was sharp over short distances and had that phenomenal awareness. And maybe he has got that awareness, but I don't think he's got the sort of absolute lightning pace of the two of them. And so that maybe makes you think that his skill set is more replicable. He's not reliant on the speed. But then, Vieri as well, by the end of his career, was suffering badly from injuries. So there is always that caveat.
Yeah, you said earlier, George, that it would be a crime if a manager played, or a sackable offence if Rashford was played through the middle. Would it be a sackable offence if Danny Welbeck played over Evan Ferguson in the near future?
I think we'll always see De Zerbi rotate between his front options. I think Welbeck still has a part to play in this side. I think there are players who benefit from when Welbeck does play because he's still a very intelligent footballer. But in Ferguson, we've got a guy who is playing at a phenomenal level for an 18-year-old. Kind of on what Jonathan was saying, there are examples in the past of players, especially players who are of that. He doesn't look 18. He looks like a man. He doesn't look like a teenager. And you think back to players like Emil Heskey, who was a very different player in his late teens than he was in his late 20s. Michael Ricketts, who in his late teens, early 20s looked like an absolute well beater. It's hard to, I mean, it's just hard to maintain. I think you're more suited to a longer career as a front man if you can maintain that athleticism. And with Ferguson, there's got to be a question mark because he's 6'2" and because he's a big lad for his age, whether or not he'll be able to have that pace to go past players throughout his career. But what is interesting, and I was surprised looking at this morning, is that even though he's a big guy, his aerial win percentage and his headers won per game is bizarrely low. It might be a product of the way that Brighton play, possibly rather than actually the player. But I think there are only 5 players who played up front and had played more than 300 minutes last season who won fewer headers per 90 than Ferguson, which is quite a strange, especially because there's that one goal against Leicester, the header into the kind of glancing header, unbelievable header. So I mean, there's stuff to work on, but when you consider that, I think Bohemians, the club he played for in Ireland, have supposedly a 10% sell-on clause. When he does end up moving for enough 100 million, it's going to be someday to be a Bows fan.
I think that point you make about injuries, I think that's maybe a reason why Danny Welbeck should play some games. That you got to remember, I know he looks like a man, but he is only 18, and I think there is reason not to play him every week for that, because of that. And he's already, I mean, he obviously missed the Ireland games with injury. Had a few games out last season with injury. So I mean, look, that happens obviously. So I'm not saying that's necessarily a reason to be too fearful. But I don't know if you listened to the Second Captain's podcast, and Ken early on that went back and looked at Michael Owen's first hat-trick, Robbie Fowler's first hat-trick, and what was said about them afterwards. And the thing that he picked out was Roy Evans, who was Liverpool manager at the time, about Michael Owen, saying, "I'd be a braver man than me would leave him out next week." And Ken making the point, well, maybe he had been a bit braver. Maybe his hamstring wouldn't have snapped later that season. And apparently Owen was a nightmare when he was left out. He was constantly complaining. I don't know what Ferguson's like as far as that goes, but what Zerbi said after the game 2 weeks ago made me think he is very aware of that danger of overexposing kids. But I think it's where managers do have to resist pressure, both from the players, from the media, from fans, to keep playing the 18-year-old. I think you do need to give them time off. So people like you, in fact, Dan, people like you ruin young players by saying that Danny Welbeck shouldn't play instead of them.
I was asking a question.
He's also...
I'm just asking questions. You and Russell Brand and Matt Letizia.
That's not Matt Letizia, please. Not Matt Letizia, please, Jonathan.
He's also just been sent home from international duty, isn't he, with an injury? So, he might not be in from the start here anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I hope he is, because he's in my fantasy football team, which was a real differentiator in fantasy football last week, Jonathan, which I'm sure you desperately care
a braver
about.
man than you would leave him out of your fantasy football team.
Kept him in, didn't I? Kept him in. You got to keep the faith with these young players. They need games, Jonathan. You've got to have them in there. In the starting 11. Actually, the fewest minutes per goal, if we look at the top 10 here, only Callum Wilson and Erling Haaland since the Premier League season kicked off last season have got a better goals per minutes ratio. I was going to say that wrong. So Erling Haaland's got 74.4 minutes per goal, Callum Wilson 99.1, and Evan Ferguson is 115.7, and then the drop off after that is by 12 minutes or so. So he was in good company.
I'd like to see those stats if you filtered out games where players have come off the bench, because presumably quite a few Callum Wilsons are off the bench, which is a skill in itself. I'm not knocking that, but
he's done
it obviously it is a different thing to come off the bench against tired defenders and take advantage and to lead the line from the start and batter defenders to create space later on for others.
Interesting. Well, I can't do that, but maybe WhoScored can do that for us next week if we request it, if we ask them for it. Now, I think we recorded our last show before the transfer window shut, George, so we didn't get a chance to talk about Sofyan Amrabat, who has joined Manchester United. There has been a need for another midfield player, particularly someone who's a little bit more defensive-minded. Will he improve things for them? Because they have looked very open at the start of this season.
I think if Sofyan Amrabat can't improve Manchester United's midfield, then it would be a pretty damning indictment on him, because I think Dan, you could get in there alongside Casemiro and probably do a job right now, because they need someone who can he can play alongside Casemiro, who can provide some legs alongside him, who can ensure that Casemiro isn't the only person protecting the back four. It was interesting, last week or 2 weeks ago on this show, Sam Tai, who's obviously seen more of Amrabat at club level than me, spoke about how the Amrabat that we saw from Morocco in Qatar,
that was interesting.
It's quite a different player to the player that he's watched a lot of Fiorentina. Kind of saying he's much better on the ball than those of us who remember him from Morocco. He's less of that passionate, either passionate or hothead, however you want to look at it, where he was playing at a million miles an hour. So, I think it's a case of wait and see. It's another example of United's bizarre incompetence in the transfer market, where they were first linked with Højlund and Amrabat early in the summer, and it took them 3 months to get the deals over the line. Maybe if Amrabat had been there from June, then the season wouldn't have started so poorly, and teams like Wolves wouldn't have been able to carve them open so easily, even in the game that they won. So, really excited to see how he'll get on. Certainly, a player that Manchester United need, albeit a player whose stock seemed to rise sharply after a major tournament. I think players that you're signing off the back of what is actually kind of 5 or 6. I mean, there's no way that Amrabat, I think, would have been on United's radar if it wasn't for the World Cup. And that in itself, looking at players like Karel Poborski, going back a couple of decades.
Jordi
Cruyff, yeah. I mean, it's not always the most sensible recruitment plan, but yeah, we'll see how he gets on.
El Hadji Diouf as well. Salif Liverpool went after
that whole Senegal team.
The one you didn't know as well. It works wonders every time, as we've seen over the years. Now, Jonathan, I've saved this next question for your legacy WhoScored Edge of the Box fans. Are going to love this next topic. Finally,
Billy Gilmour.
talk about Billy Gilmour. We've waited a long time for this, Jonathan. I mean, and knowing Zerbi, you probably won't even start up against Amrabat at the week, and we've got the head-to-head here. But Billy Gilmour's made a good start to the season. Not quite the levels that Graham Souness spoke about him in 2021 when we took the mick and then started mentioning him every show. But now it's just that we get to mention him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any player's ever played as well as Graham Souness claimed Billy Gilmour played in that game at the Euros. But he was really, really good against Newcastle. And yeah, Ferguson obviously and quite rightly took all the headlines because he got the hat-trick. But Billy Gilmour wasn't far behind him. It was very obvious the way Brighton like to play, that they get the ball to the centre-backs play it to Billy Gilmour plays it wide. And Newcastle actually did a pretty good job, certainly early on, of shutting that down. The problem Newcastle then had was that, I think partly because of doing that, and partly just because of the nature of who they have certainly who they started with in midfield that week, the fact that Joe Willock wasn't available, and they had started Sonali rather than Longstaff. Bruno Guimaraes was deep in midfield. I don't think he's naturally the most defensive player. And without some more physical presence alongside him, it meant João Pedro got a lot of space. And that's directly caused by the Billy Gilmour effect. As Newcastle sort of adjusted, Billy Gilmour suddenly got more space and started controlling the game. And that second goal for Ferguson, it's actually caused by Gilmour slightly miscontrolling the ball. And it draws two Newcastle players towards him, but he reacts quickly enough.
A player like Billy Gilmour probably did it on purpose, Jonathan. It was part of it. Sure.
Well, possibly. But yeah, he reacted to get to that, what threatened to be loose ball quickest, and then played a first-time pass at pace to Ferguson, who was able to turn onto it. I think he had a difficult time at Norwich, but this season, he looks like he might be the player. Maybe not the player Graham Souness wants him to be, but the player we thought he might be when he started to come through at Chelsea.
It'd be interesting if he does do it really well, because I wouldn't think Chelsea would try and buy him back. But that is their normal tactic. If you've done well for Brighton, your midfielder will try and get you in. That's not going to work this time around unless they've got some kind of buyback in there. It's good to see him doing well, because I do think he's a really good player. Like you said, suffered a little bit at Norwich, who were a mess. Chelsea didn't really ever get a proper chance, a proper look in. I think you shouldn't judge someone on their first full season at a club, and now he's come into that Brighton team that's so settled and got the methods and everything that we harp on about every week about. I think he'll go on and have a really good season, so it's great to see him start the way he has this time round. George, let's talk about the signing of Ansu Fati for Brighton. On the face of it, incredible coup from Brighton, how they've managed to get Ansu Fati. And years ago they wouldn't have been able to dream of doing something like this, but they're an attractive club because of the way they build and the way they develop players. But looking at it, I know you need a squad, but I don't see how you get him and Matoma on the pitch at the same time.
Well, I mean, interestingly, last season, Fati, who's had really bad injury issues over the last couple of years, has had surgery and the rest of it. He played a part for Xavi's Barcelona last season of basically coming on the bench late and doing exactly what Jonathan was talking about earlier with subs coming on late against tired legs, scoring a few goals, getting a few assists, and kind of making hay towards the back end of games. But this is a guy that 3 years ago was basically seen as being Lionel Messi's successor, and now
he took Messi's number 10 shirt, so he's got some confidence.
Yeah. I mean, he is an undoubted talent. I mean, there seemed to be some politics about the way that he left Barcelona with his dad getting involved and saying that he wanted to send. He thought he should go to Real Madrid, which isn't going to go down well with the Barcelona hierarchy in any way. But I don't really see where the downside is for this for Brighton. They take on a player who they know has incredible talent. If he isn't fit enough, or if fitness issues or whatever, or he's lost any of his ability due to those injury concerns, then it comes to an end at the end of the season. If he if they revitalise him and he stays to the end of the campaign, they might be first in the queue to sign him if he's available at the end of the season. An unbelievable talent on his day, and incredibly exciting for Brighton to have him. And I think for Roberto De Zerbi, if Fati is playing well enough to take Mitoma's place, that is an incredibly good problem to have rather than an issue.
Could he be Fati the Europa League player, Jonathan, and then Mitoma in the Premier League? Perhaps could that be why Brighton might utilise it?
Yeah, I assume that's how they envisaged to start with. That they mix and match with European competition, with League Cup, FA Cup. I think the concern is, from what I understand, Brighton are paying his wages and he's on 200 grand a week. I'm not sure how that works without having a massive inflationary effect on the rest of the squad. So that would be the one issue. But from a purely football point of view, I think having that extra option, and I think particularly a player who is young, is coming back from injury issues, who is used to coming off the bench, being able to rest Matoma last 20 minutes of games, I don't think that's the worst thing. And maybe you can drop him through the middle sometimes. Yeah. I don't know if he or Matoma could play from a right. I don't know if that would work, whether that's something they've looked into, that maybe you could play them both. And again, maybe that's something to do in the Europa League rather than in a Premier League game. But I think it's partly about just sort of bolstering or mainly about bolstering the squad.
I mean, if you'd have told Graham Souness that Ansu Fati and Billy Gilmour would have been linking up a couple of years ago, he'd have been assuming Billy Gilmour would have been running the Barcelona midfield, wouldn't he? Like, he absolutely would have done. We've got a Manchester United and Brighton combined 11 here, and it's 7 to Brighton, 4 to Manchester United. Going to butcher the goalkeeper's name probably here. So we've got Verbruggen in goal, Wan-Bissaka right back, England's Lewis Dunk partnering Lisandro Martinez, Estupiñán at left back, a holding midfield two of Casemiro and Pascal Gross, and then Bruno Fernandes as a 10, Solly March on the right, Matoma on the left, and Evan Ferguson up front. I think it's fair to say Manchester United fans would probably swap their front three for Brighton's front three at the moment, probably with the exception of Rashford. But yeah, again, years ago, doing a Manchester United and Brighton combined 11 would have been unheard of, unthinkable to have 7 Brighton and 4 Manchester United. And as we know, George, anyway, Brighton are probably more likely to challenge for the title than Manchester United.
Would you disagree with that?
Probably not. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, probably not. I probably wouldn't. No.
There's method to the madness.
Yeah. Let's have some predictions for Manchester United and Brighton. Well, I'm finding this one tough to call, so I'm going to go to you first, Jonathan.
I've bottled it. 1-1.
2-1 Brighton.
I'm going to go for 2-1 to Brighton. That's what I'm going to do. I thought you said 2-1 to Manchester United. I do apologise. I'll stick with it anyway. Then nothing to lose against you. Then if I go 2-1 Brighton.
That's what Sam said. If you copy me every single time at the end of the season, then you beat me. So
that's how leagues are won. They're built on copying people. It's not about what you produce. It's built on copying people. If you want to win the league, let's look next at Bournemouth against Chelsea. Solanke playing against his old team, I believe there. Jonathan, Pochettino's start in general, I mean, I think it's such a tough job. I think people were predicting Chelsea to be much better this season. I think they will be better. But it's not easy to knit all those players together still, even for a manager of his calibre. Oh,
yeah. I mean, it's still a complete shambles. I mean, I don't know where I mean, they've also got loads of injuries again. So it's just as well they've got a first team squad of 842 because about 820 of them are injured. So yeah, it's I guess what they do now have, you know what their midfield is going to be. Or I say even that, because you assume it should be Fernandes and Caicedo. But now Fernandes is playing slightly more advanced with Conor Gallagher playing at the back of midfield, which just seems a bizarre way of using them. And I guess that's why they were so desperate to get in some sort of central attacking talent, why they brought in Cole Palmer. But a Cole Palmer deal is such a funny deal. I mean, I just sort of think the fact that Manchester City, who have no financial pressure on them whatsoever, if they're prepared to sell you a player for £45 million, that's a really good reason not to buy that player for £45 million. It just... What have City seen in him that makes them think? In a kid, it's not like he's nearing the end of his career. It's not like we know what ceiling he's reached. What have City seen in him to say actually it's worth shipping him on and getting the 45 million quid in? So yeah, there's questions all over the place. That squad, there's still huge holes in it, and the fact that it's been a difficult start, I don't think can surprise anybody. I think Pochettino is now in a difficult position that, since he left Tottenham, and I've got a lot of sympathy with him for what happened at Tottenham. That I think it was lack of investment in the squad caused it to go stale towards the end. And I think the new stadium plus Daniel Levy have to take responsibility for that rather than Pochettino. But in those 4 years since then, all he's done is 18 pretty poor months at PSG. So his stock is not rising. And if he doesn't make a success of this, where's next for him? And it's very hard to see him going to a big club next if Chelsea fails. So I think there's questions on the bench and questions all over the squad.
Well, Chelsea have done a great job of shifting players out, I think. But again, George, do you think maybe they've done it a little bit too much in the summer? Some people will say they had to, but it does just feel all over the place. And like Jonathan says, when you've spent £1 billion across 12 months, there shouldn't be holes in the squad. It should be the complete opposite.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think when you look individually at the players that they bring in, there are very few that aren't pretty exciting signings in isolation. But when you put them all together, there doesn't seem too much to end up thinking apart from, hold on, this is a player under the age of 22 who's had 50 appearances and done quite well at an elite team. Let's sign him. It's interesting on the Cole Palmer point. Like there were 3 players at Man City coming through the academy at the same time, all basically perceived as being the next big stars. And from my understanding, Palmer was probably the least exciting of the 3. This is a couple of years ago. You had Liam Delap, James McAtee and Cole Palmer. And Palmer was the one who stayed at the club and therefore got the opportunities in the first team and has looked very good and had a great summer for the England under-21s as well. So his stock was inevitably high. But you look at Delap, who's had 2 loan spells last season in the Championship and did not perform well at all. He's doing okay this time around at Hull, but, again, at Hull. And James McAtee, who is a part of a Sheffield United squad who got promoted out of the Championship. But, when you compare him to, say, Iliman and Jai, like, they were streets apart. Like, he was a good part of the squad. So I think for Manchester City, they probably look at Cole Palmer and think, how good would he have to be in a couple of years' time to then be worth £45 million? Like, he'd have to develop at a continual trajectory up. So I think it's a no-brainer for them to sell him, even if they probably did rate him fairly highly, given how many minutes he was given by Guardiola. And that seems to be Chelsea's way. Like they ask how much it's going to cost to get a player. They get told a number and they pay the number and they move on. I do think Chelsea have been a bit unlucky at times. Like, you look through their games this season, it's been bad finishing that's cost them. You've got the Enzo penalty miss against West Ham, on which the game turned. Against Forest, they obviously missed so many chances, both before and after Elanga's goal. And when they start putting those chances away, Jackson being probably the biggest culprit so far, I think it's not long until they go on a bit of a run. Like, I'm not saying they're going to suddenly blast teams away, but I think it's not long until they put a run of form together that'll get them up pretty mobile again. I think the performances are probably good enough, but they're still way below the sum of their parts, because when you look at the team and individuals, there are loads of players within their squad who most teams probably all teams in the Premier League would like to have, but you can't go through 2 transfer windows and bring in basically a squad and a half full of players.
I mean, you say when they start putting the ball in the back of the net, and I accept that Nkunku's out at the moment and he's a very good goal scorer. But the rest of that team, where are the goals? Raheem Sterling's never been massively prolific, except for at City when it was in a very defined playing style, getting to the back post and knocking the ball in the net. Mudryk doesn't look like he's ever scored a goal in his life. Nicholas Jackson looks like a good mobile striker, but again, he might come, but he doesn't look like a finisher to me. It feels a bit still like it's going to be the same problems for Chelsea as they had last season. They'll create chances, but they don't have that man who has got the eye for goal.
But that's the problem when you bring in kids, right? I mean, Nicholas Jackson had started 16 league games before this season. Mudryk had started 33 league games, I think, in Ukraine before and not even all for Shakhtar. Some of them on loan before that. I think Mudryk. We've seen him in the games against Celtic and against Leipzig in the Champions League. We've seen him finishing really well. But even from that, hang on, sorry, there's a fox running. What? It's the middle of the day. What is going on?
This is the guy Chelsea need, that fox in the box, Jonathan. It's
a fox on my terrace. I mean, the arrogance of them. It's staring in at me. The door's open. I'm slightly concerned, but stop staring. I am just going to go and close the door if that's all right. I really don't want him coming in.
It would be funny if a fox just ran into your house.
I hope Jonathan walks back in with a fox in his arms.
I'd love to just see a fox bolt across the screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You dealt with the fox issue?
Well, he's giving me a right stare.
Oh my God! Look at
That's
that.
how close he is.
Wow, that looks like a painting.
Oh my word! Yeah, it looks like it does look a bit like a painting. I've completely lost where we are with this now. Completely lost where we are. I think we've probably covered Chelsea there. I would say, if in an attacking sense.
Yeah, I was just saying that. Yeah, because they're not because they're kids and they're not playing well. It's difficult to see where the confidence is coming from.
Yeah, he's going to be. I mean, look, if there's any manager that he's going to build a team, it probably is Pochettino. But I still think there's more questions than answers with Chelsea, which again should not be the case after you've spent £1 billion in 12 months. One of the areas they just haven't addressed for me, George, is goalkeeper. Again, how can you spend £1 billion and not have a bona fide number one? Robert Sanchez was struggling at Brighton. That's why he lost his place to Jason Steele. He's now Chelsea's number one. Chelsea, they've been one of the most successful English teams in the last decade or so. And they got Robert Sanchez in goal.
I think there's a bit of recency bias here. Like Sanchez, if Chelsea had bought Sanchez a year ago, I think everyone would have thought it was quite a good deal. He's not particularly old. He's got a long career ahead of him. He's an international. He's plays the way that Pochettino likes to play, where he's very comfortable with the ball at his feet.
Is he that comfortable? He never strikes me as being comfortable on the ball. I've got to be honest. People talk about.
I think he's fine. I mean, he played under Brian Barry Murphy at Rochdale, so he must have been giving them what they did, as you know, Dan.
Of course. But, so many good footballers.
Correct. But when you look at the career trajectory of Edouard Mendy, who came into Chelsea in 2020 and was basically being hailed as the best keeper in the league for a time, and then lost his place to Kepa not long later. It's easy for these, especially the keepers, and even someone like David De Gea, who over the course of his Manchester United career went from the sublime to the ridiculous. Robert Sanchez is a good keeper who went through a difficult spell, I would say. I'm sure Chelsea would have explored other options, but in terms of who is available for a certain price point, maybe the plan is that Sanchez will in time be the second keeper, but he's the person who's in there now. And I'm sure, given the Chelsea way, if there's an opportunity to recruit someone else above him, they will just go ahead and do that. But they needed a keeper. Kepa did well to another player who's been through massive cycles in his pretty short career, did well to regain the shirt or the gloves. Look at the move that he's got himself now. But I think Chelsea fans were pretty united in the fact that they needed a new goalkeeper to come in. So, yeah, I'm not writing off Sanchez as of yet. I almost think investing in a keeper when they've had a difficult spell but has proven quality in the past probably isn't the worst way to go about it.
Well, he's in the Who Scored lowest rated goalkeepers in the Premier League since 22-23. And actually, he's the lowest ranked goalkeeper that's currently playing in the Premier League. So not pleasant reading for Chelsea fans. Jonathan, what do you think of Sanchez? Surely, Chelsea can do better than Robert Sanchez, surely.
I'm sure that they probably will. I mean, they've brought in, I've forgotten his name, the Serbian lad who's playing in MLS. Petrovic, yeah. So yeah, they've got him who, as with the rest of the squad, is lined up for the future. I think Sanchez was essentially somebody they could get in to cover for Kepa because they decided that they wanted Kepa out of the squad off the books, and the injury to Courtois gave him the opportunity to loan him to Real Madrid. So I can't believe he's the keeper they believe will be leading to the Champions League in 3 years' time.
It's almost like, we need a keeper, where should we go? We've been to Brighton before, let's go there and go goalkeeper. It almost feels that simple. I know they've got some former Brighton staff behind the scenes at Chelsea, but yeah, to me, it just seems very, very basic. George, let's talk about Bournemouth and David Brooks, someone, again, you'll have watched a lot of in the EFL. It's been a tough start for the new manager trying to implement his ideas so far, but they've done okay, I would say. There is some encouraging signs, but David Brooks is certainly one of those encouraging signs.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant to see Brooks doing what he's doing. A guy who was such a great talent coming through at Sheffield United, got his move to Bournemouth, a really exciting talent, a Welsh international, and then of course was diagnosed with leukemia out of nowhere. So for him to, firstly for Bournemouth to have kind of stood by him and given him the necessary support to get him back to health and fitness is laudable. But I think just as football fans, we can all agree that when a guy with that kind of promise is diagnosed with that kind of illness and comes back and starts performing the way he is in the Premier League, that is something that everyone can kind of get behind and applaud.
Of course.
For Bournemouth themselves, when you look at the start they've had on paper, I mean, it didn't look great. But when you consider now that they played Spurs, who are currently second, Liverpool, who are currently third, West Ham, who are currently fourth, and Brentford, who are currently eighth, and they drew against the final two there, West Ham and Brentford. Like it's a difficult start. Now they host a Chelsea team who might be lower down in the table, but certainly have the quality to cause them issues. So I think with Bournemouth, it's got to be a case of just eke out what you can for now. Easier games are going to come.
Let's have our predictions for Bournemouth against Chelsea then. I'll go first this time, and I will say Bournemouth 1, Chelsea 1. Jonathan?
2-1 to Chelsea.
2-1 to Chelsea. George?
1-0 to Chelsea.
1-0 to Chelsea. Let's get on with the rest of our predictions. And I don't know whether Jonathan knows, but I'm quite comfortably top. Or at least I was quite comfortably top. We will get a full league table in the coming weeks. Start with Wolves against Liverpool, which is the Saturday lunchtime kickoff. Jonathan?
2-1 to Liverpool.
I'm going to go for 3-0 to Liverpool. George?
2-0 Liverpool.
2-0 Liverpool. George, you can start. Villa Palace?
2-0 Villa.
1-0 Villa.
Exactly the same for me. 1-0 to Villa. Fulham, Luton. I'm going to go 1-1 again. Fulham, Luton. George?
0-0. Hasn't been one yet, has there?
1-0 to Fulham.
Tottenham against Sheffield United. George?
2-0 Spurs.
3-0 Tottenham for me. Jonathan?
2-0 Spurs.
West Ham against Manchester City. Jonathan?
2-1 to City.
Yeah, I'm going to go the same. 2-1 to Manchester City. George?
1-1.
1-1. He's done it. Another tough one to call. Newcastle against Brentford. I'm going to say 2-1 to Newcastle.
2-0 Newcastle.
1-0 Newcastle.
Everton, Arsenal, Jonathan.
2-1 to Arsenal.
2-1 to Arsenal. I'm going to go 3-0 to Arsenal. George?
2-0 Arsenal.
2-0 to
I think
Arsenal.
2-0 for basically every game.
You have done a lot of 2-0s there. And then finally, Nottingham Forest against Burnley. Jonathan, in the midst of taking more photos.
1-0 to Forest.
I'm going to go 1-1 again. George?
2-1 Burnley.
Done it. That's a bold shout, George, that is.
Thank you.
Let's finish then with Nottingham Forest. In their last 10 games, Jonathan, they've won 5, lost 3 and drawn 2. It kind of felt last time they just started to get things right in January, and then they threw a load of new players in and went on a bit of a sticky run again. They've started the season well, and then on deadline day, they've thought, whoa, we haven't bought 27 players here. We better do something quickly, and signed a load on the last transfer deadline day. What have you made of that, and what have you made of Forest's start to the season?
Well, the start of the season's been really good. I mean, even the games where they haven't won, you have a game at Old Trafford, obviously 2-0 up inside 5 minutes.
Yeah, I watched that. They were good.
And played, I mean, they get undone by... I mean, I think it was a penalty. I think it was a red card, but they're fairly harsh decisions. You look at the game at Arsenal, where again, second half of that game they played really well. So the fact they've got 6 points in 4 games, and 3 of those games have been away from home, and 2 of them against teams who finished in the Champions League places last season, that's a really good start for them. But they have brought in 14 players in the window, albeit 3 on loan, and that I guess is a concern, but at least Steve Cooper has been through that before. And yeah, if you actually look at the teams he's picked, it's been pretty consistent. He's picked the same back 3 in every game. Then the midfield 4, he's sort of been cycling between 5 of them. So there's only 5 different players who played in those 4 midfield positions. Gibbs White and Awoniyi up front with Johnson, who's now gone. So Danilo played there in the game at Chelsea, who was one of those 5 midfielders. So he's kept that pretty consistent. And I think the fact he's had that experience twice before, I don't think he's going to be seduced into suddenly kind of making wholesale changes. And I guess the assumption is that Elanga comes in and takes Johnson's place. I mean, it's basically got to be him or Nikita. They're the 2 who can do it.
Not Divock Origi.
Hudson-Odoi, yeah.
There we go. We both know the player that could come in. It's ridiculous, isn't it? You forget who they've signed.
I know.
I mean, Hudson-Odoi, I guess, of the new players would be the obvious one. Yeah. But anyway, the basic point stands. I think he has a pretty clear idea of what he wants his team to be, and I think he's strong enough to leave players out.
Yeah, George. What about you? What do you make of Forest? They got so. I love Morgan Gibbs White. I think everyone scoffed at his fee a little bit, but that's a player that really carried Forest on his back at the end of last season with Brennan Johnson, and always wants the ball, never hides, and I love that about him. Works hard as well. So they have got some good players, and they have had an interesting start to the season. Also, where does Awoniyi rate in terms of Premier League striker. We saw him flash up on our graphic earlier. He's in sensational form, really.
Incredible form. I mean, it's kind of a weird run, given that he wasn't prolific in any way for the first 30-odd games of last season, and suddenly scored the goals to keep Forest in the division, and is now really settling in. It's funny you mentioned Gibbs White. I spent a glorious day in the summer of 2022 just on Twitter arguing with people about how good Gibbs White is. And you look through it now, most of them have been deleted, sadly.
Really?
But I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, it's just an unbelievable talent, and someone who's still...
One of them wasn't me, was it?
I'll go back and have a look. Yeah, I mean, he's still incredibly young. Like, I don't think people quite realise yet that for a guy who has played a lot of first-team football, I mean, he's still 23 years old and is improving very quickly. So, but, when you look through if you go to the Forest page on WhoScored and kind of sort the players by their WhoScored rating, you look through them and it's Willy Bolly at the top, who was there last season, Owini second, Gibbs White third, Aurier fourth, Turner the keeper, who's come in the summer fifth, then Neco Williams, like McKenna and Yates. Doesn't seem to matter how many players Forest bring in. McKenna plays, Yates plays, Worrell plays. Like the success rate for the amount of players they've won over the last year or so is pretty poor. But then there are players at the top end who are still doing well. So I think after the season they had last season, it felt like surely they were going to change their transfer strategy. But you look at the amount of players they brought in, like it would be impossible for them all to fit in. So I think they'll be okay. Like they seem to have a fairly settled team now. It's just whether or not Marinakis, their owner, is going to have an issue if Steve Cooper continues to play his trusted players rather than the ones that he's bought for him. We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, WhoScored have put together a best 11 of Forest players, including their new signings of I think it was 2023. I've been distracted again because two more Fox pictures have come through. Jonathan, so they should definitely be flashed up on the screen instead of the Nottingham Forest team. Absolutely sensational scenes. To be honest, it's been more edge of the Fox this week than edge of the box.
Very good.
Thank you very much. It's been another enjoyable 50 minutes or so with the two of you. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in and watched as well. We will be back next week, as always, to preview next week's Premier League action, so make sure you don't miss it by subscribing with your post notifications on. Give us a like as well and comment with whether you agree with our thoughts ahead of this coming game week. Yeah, nothing else to say really. Let's go. Thank you very much.